Hello, hi Sam, and hello everyone. Welcome to Research Insights with Elite Mind Academy. So those are our weekly live discussions where we discuss a variety of topics from organizational well-being and development industry. And usually we delve into topics that stay behind the closed doors. And today we have a very special guest, Sam. So welcome.
Hi.
Today's topic is on psychological safety, and I think when we talk about psychologically safe working environments and cultures, some of those words and themes are being thrown around, and yet we don't always understand what does it really mean to have that safe working environment. What is it, how does it evolve, and how we sometimes, even though we all know that we want that safe environment, how do we end up having the opposite sometimes, right? How do we end up having toxic working environments? So today we really wanted to explore the topic of psychological safety at work, how that evolves, the impact of that on the teams, on the businesses, on creativity and innovation, on people's well-being, but also what can we practically do to create those safe environments, and what is the role of leadership in that. So stay tuned in. Please feel free to drop in any questions, comments, and suggestions in the chat for those who are listening. And yeah, for those who haven't met Sam yet, so Sam is an amazing business psychologist and he's mental health expert. He's been working as a well-being and mental health professional, specifically in creative industries. So he's definitely the right person to be discussing this topic with me. So I'm really glad to have you on board. So Sam, maybe would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and just share a bit more of your background as well with our audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Evelina. It's great to be here. My name's Sam Tewari, as you just pointed out. And yeah, I'm a business psychologist with a background in the creative industries. Originally used to work in the music business as a A&R and a music agent prior to that. So that's kind of where I've come from on this journey. But I have a background also in the more clinical side of mental health, working for mental health and social care organizations within the NHS. And I'm also on the organisational psychology master's programme at Birkbeck at the University of London, where I'm specialising my research in psychological safety, particularly at major record labels, which has been a very interesting project so far. I also run a business as well, which is around mental health accessibility at concerts. So we've worked with artists like Lewis Capaldi and Youngblood and clients such as Live Nation and the O2 Arena to, improve psychological safety within a very practical sense in terms of the arena concert experience that people have there. So that's really around creating safe spaces and hiring teams of mental health professionals to support fans and ticket buyers, as well as offering backstage support to artists and touring crews. But yes, quite a wide variety there, but it all kind of focuses around this idea of mental health and well-being.
Yeah. Great. So Sam, let me ask you first, actually, when I say psychological safety, what does it mean personally to you, right? Because I think it's very easy for us to go into research and so on. But again, I'd be very just curious to kind of get to know more of your human side as well and say, why have you chosen to study this as a subject? Why does it appealing to you personally? And what's your relationship with psychological safety at work?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tough one because as an academic, I have a head full of these like research driven definitions. But I think we all have our own personal reasons for coming to particular topics. And for me, it was from my experience working in the creative industries, I always felt there was this juxtaposition between the creative corporate environment and the people that were attracted to be employed there and the work that they were carried out in this very like creative sense. And I felt there was a real conflict there. Things around the way that teams are being led, the resources that were available, the constraints that were put on those roles, the processes that were being drilled into people. And it made me think that maybe there's a way of doing things differently here. How do we optimize for psychological safety and in turn creativity? And that was way before I went on my academic journey. But it was kind of the small steps that kind of lead you to that destination. But I think from more of a research-driven perspective, psychological safety really is about having an ability to turn up to work and to be able to speak our mind and be ourselves without fear of being, fear of backlash, I suppose, and of negative consequences. It's an ability to take risks, whether that's creatively or interpersonally, and to feel supported by the team and the leaders there. I think that for me is the essence of what psychological safety is about.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, when I'm looking at that as well, working as organizational development consultant and often delivering some of those culture change initiatives and restructuring organizations, it's very interesting to explore and to explore the definitions and meaning of it, right? Because yes, of course, we have, let's say, our academic definitions of what it is. But when we look at what does it really mean to people and to each individual, they will all highlight very kind of different aspects of it that are more or less important to them. And I think it's so important to start with that, to kind of build the culture from the bottom up and really listen to what matters to people and allow them to bring their whole selves and their creativity, their passions into work, because that then allows that culture to flourish. And when we look at the kind of I'd always say, the psychological safety is not maybe something that just exists per se, like you have it or you don't have it. It's kind of a spectrum, isn't it? On one hand, you can have, too much safety in a way that is, rigid and structured, and behaviors are very kind of like comfortable, and everyone says like, yeah, we are all happy and everything's good. But then also it kind of becomes too comfortable, and then it stifles innovation, it stifles creativity to a degree as well. Or you have too much change, too much uncertainty, too much pressure, too much stress on the other hand, and that again does the same results, right? It again stifles your freedom to be yourself. It kind of limits your creativity and contribution that you can bring to the business. So I would say that psychological safety is this kind of ideal balance, or kind of harmony, maybe it's a better word, harmony, probably better than balance, between routine, safety and familiarity, and a positive challenge, right? And you do that in a social context, in that social working environment. So how do you gauge that on that perspective, right? And I think for me, sometimes what is very interesting is we all know that we want to be ourselves, we want to be trusted, we want to be liked. So how on earth do we end up having those toxic, unhelpful working environments where we dread going to work? How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious answer is it's a top-down thing. I think if we really boil this down to the essence of like what creates a toxic or a psychologically safe working culture, it comes down to leadership. The leadership are they conscious leaders? Are they on board with the idea of what it means to create a psychologically safe environment? And do they have the tools and the resources to be able to do that? Are they acting, according to the demands of their own roles, but neglecting the human side? And I think what you kind of point to there is this kind of like, it's all about balance. It's it's creatively, and I come back to this idea of creativity and psychological safety because they kind of seem to influence each other. But it's like you want to be dancing on the edge of chaos sometimes with creativity, and you want to also but on the other side be creative within constraints. And yeah, I think it is that balance for sure.
Yeah, so it's
But
probably the balance between kind of your human part of self and the professional side of self, right?
mm,
Because I think, especially, when we look at this, as you mentioned, as cultures very often are created top down, right, with the leadership vision and what kind of habits and behaviors they role model, right? Because sometimes you say one thing but then the behaviors are very different, and that really creates that conflict and kind of incongruence in the organization. So going back to that point of leadership and the balance, that sometimes we box people into their roles in the job descriptions, right? And now you're a manager, now you are a CEO, now you are, IT
mm,
expert, whatever that is, without actually leaving space for human. Or sometimes there are other way around. There are some examples of companies where I worked with where actually the culture is too friendly, and people sometimes say, well, that's a good thing, you cannot be too friendly and too open and to yourself. Well,
mm,
actually you can, because in certain cases that attitude of very, very friendly relationships prevent organizational performance to be kind of managed and driven in the right way, because you don't discipline your friends.
mm,
You don't have performance conversations with
mm,
your best mate. You don't set clear performance targets and KPIs. The way you would ask for help and the way you would challenge some behaviors are very different. When we build those friendly relationships to a degree where professional conversations become kind of, it becomes no space for that, it actually limits people's development and honesty even, right?
mm,
Because then you create an environment where everybody kind of knows and trusts each other, but you believe that everything is right and everything's good, and we are afraid to break those trust bonds. Therefore we don't take risks, we don't challenge certain things that are maybe not right.
mm.
So that's been very interesting, and this has been kind of my own learning from my own experience, because you kind of you I think as professionals in that space trying to work with organizational culture, we encourage this kind of family support and friendships, but seeing some of those extremes and the downsides of that was also very interesting. So yeah, kind of going back to that balance, and also those habits and behaviors that are being role modeled by the leadership. Yeah,
I
crucial.
think that's a true marker of a psychologically safe environment as well. It's that ability to provide honest, constructive feedback and provide the feedback that people might not necessarily want to hear. But in a psychologically safe environment, the employees have this sense that their leaders have their best interests at heart. They're not going to abuse power, for example, and that the feedback that's being provided is to help them grow as a employee, but also to help the organization to reach its goals ultimately. But on the flip side, if it's a toxic environment, that trust isn't there, so it's hard to have that free flow of communication.
Mm. Yeah, and in terms of kind of the role of leadership, I think it's very important to kind of highlight that absolutely, I think most cultures are driven top down, and the role modeling of those examples at the top are crucial for creating the right cultures and the right environments. But sometimes when we say that everything is driven from the top,
Mm,
it can also be disempowering for people, because then you feel like, well, who am I? Just a little person somewhere, at the end
mm,
of the long corridor, with my little computer at the desk. Who am I to change cultures, company, and behaviors? So what do you think employees can do, and what kind of each and every one of us can do to maybe challenge some of those unhelpful patterns and habits and behaviors, and challenge upwards, right?
mm,
Because I think there are some wonderful examples where culture change can happen from bottom up. Obviously, it's a very different process and very different way of work, but it's possible to do that. So what is the relationship between that kind of like top down and bottom up, and what each person can do to maybe drive more of that change and influence?
Mm. Well, I mean, there's more like structural kind of things that can be brought in. I've heard a lot of great things about reverse mentoring programs, where it's like it's not just the leaders coaching the more junior employees, but it also goes in reverse. It's the leaders can learn from the employees further down the hierarchical pyramid, and this is important because, you know, I think for a lot of leaders, and where this toxicity may come from in some senses, is this kind of imposter syndrome, this fear of being displaced, this fear of being aged out. And especially in this world we live in that's very rapidly developing, there's a lot of leaders can learn from younger generations, especially around technology, social media, and things like that. And that, in order to implement that, there has to be this culture of learning and development. We grow together, we learn together, we make mistakes together, and things like that. On the other side of it, you know, there's the more kind of revolutionary like aspects that kind of come in. And from my work around this area in the music industry, for example, and entertainment industries, you know, there's been a lot of shifts culturally over the past few years where, you know, the Me Too movement, for example, which held a lot of people, leaders to account. It forced organizations, particularly the big ones, to take a look at their own leadership practices and what was considered ethical, and that we can't be seen to be promoting certain values or ignoring them. So I think that's also played a key role, but also the element of the LinkedIn, Glassdoor, you know, employees having more of a voice nowadays to discuss culture, organizational culture in an open forum. You know, these metrics are being recorded. You know, do you get 1 star or 5 stars for your leadership culture? And in order to attract and retain the top talent, you have to be falling in line with these practices. So there has been a power shift. But I think in psychologically safe cultures, it's embedded. It's part of the processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It has to be embedded into processes of your daily ways of working, into your leadership, into your training, into your support ecosystem, into the way you communicate, and even your reporting lines in terms of who you communicate to, when and how, and about what, right? And I really like what you said at the very beginning, that, you know, when you talk about psychological safety, you look at how can we optimize that? Because I think, you know, I really like that you use the word optimize, because it's not something that you have or you don't. That's something that you build and create as if, you know, it's a Lego blocks of, you know, like clear solid structures, right? It's an evolving ecosystemic thing where we constantly need to look at, you know, who are we? How do we operate here? How do we feel here? You know, what are we working towards? And for me, when we're delivering some culture change initiatives with Elite Mind, I have created this model to explain what culture even is, and how you create this. And we actually look at kind of different levels of intelligence, right? So if you want to simplify it, it would be kind of your head, heart, and gut, right? So your head represents all of your knowledge, all that you know, everything that you are aware of, all of the data and information that you have in organization, things that you are not aware of as well, right? And also how you get to know what you know, because those processes matter, right? So you kind of have that kind of cognitive headpiece of this cognitive intelligence about the knowledge and information. And sometimes it's not written information, it's what people know as well, and the knowledge where it's stored in a way, and when, you know, where the power states with that information very often aligns with that. Then when we look at that emotional intelligence, these are all your social relationships, how people feel, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their colleagues, how they feel about their working environment, how they feel about the scenario and the situation in which they are in. That feeling of safety and trust and communication comes in that relational space. And then when we look at somatic intelligence, this is all about your habits and behaviors. And as you'll know from your behavioral research and behavioral science, like most of our habits and behaviors are subconscious, right? We think of ourselves as we are these rational, intelligent human beings, but actually most of the time we just act on autopilot, right? And there are so many things in our environment that shapes our habits and behaviors and how we actually respond to specific person or in specific situation, right? So when we look at those elements, we use those as a building blocks to understand what people know in this organization, what they don't know, what they should know. How do we feel about ourselves, about others, about this organization? How do we behave? And sometimes we say that we do something, but we don't do that. And very often, we observe, that's why like it's so important to as well observe others and see some of those subconscious patterns of behavior that are embedded in that. And when we look at kind of combining those different levels of intelligence, when you combine your head with your heart, so all that you know with that maybe kind of emotional connection and inspiration, you use that to build your company's vision and mission and kind of that inspiring direction that employees would follow and buy into and maybe join that organization for that specific mission. When you combine your head with your gut, so your knowledge with action, now you have your organization strategy. So this is what we know, this is what we do, these are our KPIs, this is the direction of the company, this is where we're going, this is how we measure our performance, these are the goals that we're trying to get to, right? And when you combine the heart with the gut, essentially your emotions with your behaviors, you get your company's culture, right? And that's where how people feel and how they behave, that shapes that organizational culture. And obviously all those aspects are important because both strategy and the vision of the leadership that comes from the top will shape how people feel. And I think that's where the role of leadership fits in the culture change, because both strategy and the vision and direction of the company is set by leadership, right? But if we're only looking at how people feel here and how do we behave here, this aspect can be affected, kind of influenced by anyone. And when you break it down, we can really look at, okay, what are my values, and what are the values of organization, and how do we breathe and live those every day? And how can we embed those into our habits and behaviors? How can we look at how people feel and how can we contribute to them feeling better? But also challenging when something is not aligned with our values, right? So again, saying like we have great organizational culture, but then you allow gossip and you allow people say nasty things about one another, without actually openly challenging it, right? So yeah, we do ask questions in our surveys and our research, things like we proactively challenge gossip in our environment, right? That is in the power of each and every one of us, that we can challenge. If somebody comes and moans to me about you, right, will I allow that and will I fuel that gossip, or will I actually challenge that and will say, well, let's go and address that with Sam and let's see how we can have this conversation. What can we do about this? Where are these feelings coming from? Where these opinions are coming from? So I think these are small things where we look at how do we feel. There's a lot that each of us can influence how people around us feel, and how do we behave, and challenging those habits and behaviors that are not aligned with our values. So that's kind of how I personally approach culture change initiatives. And I think, when we break it down into this kind of simple human aspects of head, heart, and gut, and kind of looking at, what we know, how we feel, and how we behave, then it becomes practical and doable, right? Because now you say, okay, now, we're missing this piece of knowledge. Maybe here is this aspect of, this department is not feeling happy. Maybe people are not feeling happy about specific things, right? And we can look at why and what needs to change, and how are our habits and behaviors are kind of contributing to all of that. So, yeah, what are your thoughts of kind of looking at more of the human levels of intelligence to apply to organizational performance from this perspective?
No, it's so interesting, isn't it? And when you talk through that model, I think of the kind of like small to medium business, where it's like you have the clear leaders, and they're most likely the founders of the company, and they've set the values. It becomes.
I agree. And it's interesting you say that, because I've created this model by mentoring startups, because they usually have, these wonderful ideas. They have no idea how to structure it and how to create it and how to create culture out of their own vision. So yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's like it becomes this extension of them. And I think maybe when you start to go up into like the multinational corporations and it becomes a bit more faceless, that becomes a bit, and there's a hell of a lot more people to be embodying these cultural values. It becomes more challenging. But yeah, in the model that you were talking about, it's very interesting, and it comes back to the idea of conscious leadership as well, just having that ability to be introspective, to reflect, but also to take on the feedback of what's going on, like what's really happening here. Gossip's an interesting one, because it's like, why do people feel the need to gossip within this organization? And you could just look at it on a face value and be like, oh, that's a bad behavior, let's try and stamp that out. But it's like, what's the utility of gossip? Like, why are they gossiping? Do they feel out of control about a particular situation? And the only way for them to kind of seek psychological comfort is by like it coming out sideways and taking it round the back door and speaking to someone else about it? Why can't they just address the situation directly? And in these, bringing it back to this idea of a psychologically safe environment, if I'm in a psychologically safe environment, I don't need to go around the back door. I go straight to that person and be like, hey, look, you did that thing the other day. It made me feel X, Y, and Z. And I was, hoping we could try and work this out. That's the ideal scenario culturally, I think. And I think the role modeling, it has to come from the leaders role modeling that behavior, encouraging it, and putting in the steps to develop that style of communication, that candidness, so that people feel they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you say that, obviously in smaller organizations, the process looks very different to large organizations. And yeah, it becomes very interesting. I've been involved creating company-wide behaviors and role structure for Pret a Manger when I was working with them. And that was very, very interesting, because Pret a Manger is one of those companies that, well, obviously now it's changed and it's very different. But initially when company was co-founded and the way it ran, it had very, very strong, solid culture where everybody knew what does it mean to be a Pret employee. Everyone knew what does it mean to be Pret manager, internally. They had very strong sense of identity, and that culture and behaviors were very much embedded into that. And they were very kind of, it's not just about targets and KPIs. It was all about like who we are and how do we define ourselves. Like we work hard, but we also have fun. We wear jeans, we have summer parties, we have Friday night drinks, we support each other. There's a lot of kind of habits and behaviors that were then embedded. And what we did, we kind of attached some of those behaviors to each role. So we looked at, okay, the basic behaviors, like specific level of communication and the teamwork and helping and supporting others, that it's basic and it must be for everyone, right? And therefore that is something that you're looking for even at the recruitment stage, to make sure that person is kind of open to learn. They have open communication, and there's some, I don't remember now all these kind of specific set of behaviors, but they were embedded straight from the recruitment, saying this is what we are looking for, right? Not necessarily for specific skills and your experience and your years of work on CV, but really looking for attitudes and behaviors, and then kind of nurturing and fostering them, and then saying, okay, now if you want to add your let's say we want to be promoted to specific leadership management role, there are specific behaviors that are being added at that different level, so that that in order to be promoted and in order to develop, you have to demonstrate these behaviors. So it's not necessarily about achieving your KPIs, you also have to demonstrate attitudes and behaviors, which I found was very interesting. And I think that's one of the ways to kind of drive that culture change at work, to make sure that our behaviors and attitudes are consistent. And they were also, what was very interesting, that they were used for pay rises. They were used for as a structure for one-to-ones and for your performance management, because behind every set of behavior that is assigned to each specific role and level within an organization, you had this kind of like little list that says, I want to see those. I don't want to see those, with very specific examples, and kind of pret perfect. They called it like pret perfect, like, role modeling the excellence, right? It's like, this is like the extra stuff. And your promotion were pretty much mapped out of like, right, we're observing these behaviors, what about this, and what happened here, and you have clear evidence to demonstrate some of those. And I found that quite effective way of streamlining the habits and behaviors of the entire organization at huge scale, at big organizations. So that's something that I found was being done quite well at Pret.
And I think that's something that from my research and speaking to leaders within psychologically safe environments, and also people from unpsychologically safe environments, for example, and we call it that. Leadership development is it's one of those primary processes that really drives this. And I think from my own personal experiences, when I've either spoken to people and got their accounts of it, or from my own experience of being in environments where I've deemed it as psychologically safe, the leaders do tend to see themselves as kind of a buffer between the business demands and the human elements, and trying to effectively balance those two elements that are always in conflict, but trying to strike that sort of balance there. And the leaders who, and when the business is primarily driven by the profit side, for example, they tend to promote leaders into positions based upon their ability to perform a certain profit-driving task.
And they measure their performance and pay based on KPIs and achieving or excelling.
However, those particular skills, tasks, functions that they perform really effectively in their previous role doesn't involve the management of people. And then they get promoted to these positions where they're suddenly in charge of a team of 10, 20, 30 people. And they're completely ill-equipped to do that. Whereas when I've spoken to leaders who pride themselves on providing psychologically safe environments, particularly within the creative industries, I found the ones that really stand out are where the company has a very clear leadership training program. They have a culture of learning and development, and when they're priming people for promotion, or when they do get promoted, the workshops, the training is on point. It provides them with the skills they need and the support they need, and that's ongoing as well. It's not a one and done. It's like you check in on a yearly basis, or however frequently it is, but you're not just pushing people into that position. And even in the lead up to that as well, I was speaking to one of the leaders within one of the major labels in the States recently, and he was describing how he, it comes back to this idea of, as a leader, are you micromanaging someone? Are
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
that idea of control, or that fear of not being able to deliver, and having that, being able to put that trust in somebody who's more junior than you, on the chance that there will be learning curves, there will be risks, there will be failures, and taking a back seat and allowing them to step into that position. We were speaking in particular about the idea of taking vacation. Now, vacation in the States is like, it's almost like a taboo subject. You get 10 days a year, and that's that. But as a leader, when you take that time off yourself, which is important, when we're talking about mental health in the workplace, it's like, and you allow your junior to step up and take those meetings and step into your shoes for a week or so, and then to return and be like, how did that go? What went well? What didn't go so well? Did you strike out in a meeting, or some, what happened, and how can we learn from this? I think that's really important.
Yeah. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And obviously, the fact that the leadership development is a primary driving force for organizational culture, I love that, because absolutely, it's about learning about ourselves, learning about organization, learning about again, relationships, and our own habits and behavior. And again, it starts with that level of self-awareness. And if we don't have even the base of right self-awareness and the right training and skill set to be able to kind of deploy ourselves, to the best, to our full potential, we are feeling insecure, right? We are feeling unsafe within ourselves. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust our own processes, and no wonder why we become, micromanaging, and really, not trusting other people, because how do we, if we don't even trust ourselves, if we don't have clear processes to follow, right? So I think it really stems from this good personal development aspect, also embedded within the leadership development practices. So it kind of builds those right processes, and builds confidence in leadership to let go and to support others, and to enable that growth within their teams, rather than micromanaging and punishing when KPIs are not achieved, and so on. So yeah, it's that right balance between, again, kind of going back to that human element, and clear business direction, and leadership is a huge, powerful force in that, and building that trust, and enabling freedom to make mistakes and learn from them, right? I think that's kind of always, there was a sign whether this environment is safe, right? How do you kind of measure psychological safety? I think probably, I don't know. And again, I'd love to kind of hear some of your thoughts. I would say it's kind of like freedom to make mistakes and learn from them, to speak up openly, when you disagree, and so on. And also just kind of genuinely share your feelings, your opinions, without fear of kind of being judged or excluded, and kind of be yourself in that way, from the way you feel. So what would be some other kind of like indicators you would be looking out for to see how do we measure health of organizational culture? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of risk taking, it kind of glues those two elements of psychological safety and creativity together. Like, without risk taking, it's very hard to be creative, for example. And without a psychologically safe environment, it's hard to take risks. You're scared of the consequences of what happens if something fails, should I say. And what happens on the other side of that? Am I going to lose my job? Or are we going to come together as a team to evaluate and to learn from that, and to grow as an individual and as a team? How do we process on an individual level because of that culture? Does it install a sense of fear in me, or does it install a sense of it's an opportunity to grow? And I've seen some companies talk about celebrating failures, which is, that's kind of extreme way, but it kind of
Yeah.
cements, when you use language in this way, it cements that idea of what is our culture.
Yeah. It's okay to do mistakes. And again, it's not about the mistakes, it's what we learn from it, right? And I think if we really enable those conversations, it's not about what have you done and why have you done it, which kind of fosters a culture of blame and kind of overprotectiveness, like, no, it wasn't me, I haven't done this because of this person or that structure or system. But really looking at, okay, whatever happened doesn't matter. What we look at, it's maybe what lessons we learn from it, how can we prevent this from happening, what are the good and the bad and the ugly behind that structure, and what each of us can do differently next time, and kind of talking about the role of leadership in that. I'm a huge fan of coaching skills for leadership, because if leaders are empowered and enabled to ask the right questions to their team, well, if you want better answers and better results, you should learn how to ask better questions first, right? And enabling leadership to be able to do that, again, going back to the importance of leadership training and development, so they actually have those communication skills, that they are able to do this and kind of challenge people in an inspiring way rather than putting them down. It's so crucial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It comes back to this idea of learning development, doesn't it? It's like what skills are we equipping our leaders with to kind of bring them through and to create that sense of culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's probably the right place for us to end. And just to kind of summarize, we're really looking at the importance of culture and the different levels of intelligence behind it. What do we know here? How do we feel? And how do we behave? And how can we unpack this? And how can we challenge some of those processes and use those as building blocks to optimize our working environment? And the importance of leadership and the importance of leadership development and training as an ongoing practice to foster those processes and constantly challenge how we do things here and why we do them and how can we do that better. So thank you. If any of those who are listening want to connect with Sam and me, please feel free to reach out. We are still researching with organizations as part of our organizational design project, organizational well-being strategy, and the role of psychological safety at work is crucial. So if any of you who are listening would love to engage in some of those processes, feel free to reach out, and we can explore your culture and your ways of working together. So thank you very much and have a lovely day.